The rent was due, yet my landlord had other intentions. Infidelity Diaries. There are instances in life when the absence of words pierces more profoundly than the most heated exchange. The silence hung in the air, a palpable presence forged not from the exchange of spoken words, but from the weight of unuttered thoughts lingering between them. For the first time in what felt like ages, I found myself utterly isolated in my own struggles. My job had just slipped through my fingers. The cafe where I had poured my heart and soul for nearly 3 years suddenly shuttered its doors, leaving me in a state of disbelief. Without a hint, without a gentle dissent, on a particular day, I found myself pouring a steaming cup of coffee. In that moment, I found myself in my modest kitchen, gazing at the stack of bills accumulating on the table, struggling to inhale as the weight of panic pressed down on my chest. The week was drawing to a close, and with it came the inevitable reminder that rent was looming, while my savings remained a mere punchline, just sufficient to perhaps manage groceries and fuel, if fortune smiled upon me. My boyfriend and I were not bound by marriage. We never shared a home. That concept originated from him, not from me. He appreciated his solitude, claiming it was essential to maintain boundaries for his well-being. Yet, after a handful of years spent listening to that word, it began to resemble yet another barrier separating us. And yet, in spite of the miles that lay between us, in spite of the countless reminders I had to whisper to myself that we were not crafting a shared existence, but merely circling one another, I still found myself reaching out to him first. Before I could even finish 2 sentences, he interrupted me. "You'll figure it out," he said, as if I were merely inquiring about the weather rather than confessing my inability to pay my rent. "You consistently do." The pain of swallowing was sharp and intense. "I was wondering if you might be able to lend me a hand this month." "I would not." He sighed, and I could hear the rhythmic tapping of his fingers against an unseen surface, lost in thought. "Is it truly my obligation, though? You possess a remarkable sense of independence. You consistently express that sentiment." I felt an urge to scream, not due to his error, but because he wielded my own words like a weapon against me. He embraced my independence. I had always taken great pride in that. Yet, a distinction exists between embracing independence and being abandoned to struggle in isolation. The call concluded with one of those uncomfortable silences, where neither of us quite knew how to bring the conversation to a close. He uttered a quiet farewell, something akin to "take care," before ending the call. I lingered in that moment, the phone still clutched to my ear. Despite the silence that had enveloped the line, the apartment exuded a chill that evening, a void that transcended the mere absence of furnishings. I settled onto the floor beside the window, drawing my knees close to my chest, as I observed the streetlights flicker to life, one after another. The bustling city beyond continued its relentless pace, indifferent to the quiet unraveling of my own world. The hour was late when the knock at the door pierced the silence. Calm, composed, and unwavering, I brushed my face with the fabric of my sweater and hoisted myself up from the ground. As I turned the knob and pushed the door ajar, there he stood, waiting. The individual who oversees my dwelling. He consistently exhibited a courteous demeanor, polite in the manner that older men occasionally exhibit, as if they are aware that their existence occupies more room than it ought to. He stood tall and broad-shouldered, his dark skin glistening in the light, while his eyes held a depth that suggested they observed far more than they revealed. His voice exuded a serene, deliberate quality. He never lifted it. "Apologies for intruding at this hour," he remarked, offering a single nod. I wanted to touch base regarding the rent situation. The words sent a chill through my core. I must have appeared utterly disheveled. Crimson eyes, tousled locks, still clad in the baggy sweater I had hastily donned that morning, unable to summon the energy to care. "I am acutely aware that the deadline approaches," I managed to articulate, my throat constricted. "I find myself in the unfortunate position of having lost my job." A moment of silence lingered in the air, not the awkward sort, but rather the type where the other individual is genuinely engaged in the conversation. He allowed the silence to linger, unhurried and contemplative. He nodded once more, this time with a deliberate slowness. "It's tough," he remarked. "It saddens me to learn of this." The warmth crept up my neck, a searing wave of humiliation coursing through my veins. I loathed the insignificance that enveloped me, the glaring visibility of my predicament. "I will find a way," I exclaimed impulsively. "I simply require a moment to gather my thoughts." His eyes remained fixed, unwavering. He neither crossed his arms nor leaned against the doorframe, as some men often do when preparing to assert their authority. He remained there, firmly rooted, unwavering. "I'm not here to pressure you," he murmured gently. "If you wish to discuss possibilities, my office is always available for conversation. Feel free to drop by tomorrow if it suits you." "What are the possibilities?" The word lingered in my mind long after he had departed. I found myself uncertain about the true meaning behind his words. Uncertainty lingered within me, casting doubt on my desire to uncover the truth. Yet, as the door clicked shut behind him and I sank back onto the floor, my face buried in my hands, a singular thought invaded my mind, clinging stubbornly and refusing to fade away. The one I cherished was not someone I could rely on. Perhaps, just perhaps, I wasn't as self-sufficient as I had always convinced myself to be. Sleep eluded me that night. I lay wide awake, my gaze wandering over the fissures in the ceiling, the soft drone of the refrigerator punctuating the stillness like a relentless, unyielding metronome. With each gentle flutter of my eyelids, his voice echoed once more in my mind. "It belongs to my boyfriend, not my landlord." Those few simple words, carelessly cast my way, resonated like loose coins rattling in an empty jar. "You will find a way to navigate through this, as though that sufficed. As though that was the very essence of support." As dawn broke, the pain in my chest transformed into a chill, a piercing sensation that lingered, and navigated the day's routine with a sense of obligation, rather than desire. Showered in a haze, the water's touch eluding my senses, I threw on some clothes, indifferent to the choices I made. Denim trousers paired with a well-worn t-shirt. Hair gathered casually, lightly grazed by a brush's touch. The reflection before me revealed the truth of my weariness. The notice on my fridge regarding the rent deadline loomed over me, a silent yet menacing reminder. The sight of it filled me with a disquiet that sent tremors through my hands. The mere idea of reaching out to my boyfriend once more for assistance loomed over me like an insurmountable challenge, utterly humiliating. Yet, above all, I loathed the oppressive sensation that the dialogue would unfold in precisely the same manner as it had the previous evening. My visit to the landlord's office was unplanned. I made a promise to myself that I wouldn't. I resolved to navigate this journey independently, as it appeared everyone anticipated I would. Yet, amid the restless pacing of my apartment and the repetitive glance at my bank account, I discovered myself reaching for the lipstick, dim and scarcely perceptible. Just sufficient to give me the sense that I was, in some way, making an effort. Before stepping out of the apartment, I found myself changing my shirt twice, unadorned attire, devoid of any hint that I placed significant value on my appearance. Yet, the reality was that I truly did care. I found myself caring more than I was willing to acknowledge. His office lay merely a few blocks distant, nestled behind a quaint row of shops. I had strolled by it countless times, never feeling the urge to step inside until now. The door stood ajar, gentle melodies wafting softly from a radio perched upon the desk. He occupied a chair amidst a chaotic array of papers, engrossed in the contents of a towering stack. As he lifted his gaze and caught sight of me standing there, a smile did not immediately grace his lips. He merely inclined his head, gesturing for me to enter. "You made it," he said, his voice low and steady. I nodded, my throat constricted, rendering me unable to articulate a proper response. I settled into my seat opposite him, a wave of nostalgia washing over me, reminiscent of being 12 years old once more, anxiously anticipating a teacher's reprimand for my late homework submission. "Apologize for my sudden appearance," I finally admitted, the weight of my words more burdensome than they ought to have been. He reclined a bit, his hands resting on the chair's arms, his gaze fixed on me, exuding calmness and patience. "I mentioned that you're always welcome to come by." I gazed at my hands, fingers intertwining in my lap. I wished to hold back the tears. I had already indulged in that the previous night. I exhaled slowly, compelling myself to hold his gaze. At last, I spoke the words I had been holding back: "I need time." "You possess it," he responded. It was as if the conversation had reached its natural conclusion, yet I remained still, unwilling to break the silence. He did not either. The distance that separated us was laden with an unarticulated weight, a silent comprehension that neither of us dared to vocalize. "I never imagined it would reach this point," I whispered, uncertain if my words were meant for him or merely a reflection of my own thoughts. He remarked that the majority do not. I loathed the calmness of his voice, the way it flowed with precision, as if he had encountered this moment countless times, as if he grasped its depths far beyond my comprehension. A lengthy silence lingered, weighty yet not unpleasant. His gaze lingered on me, yet it was not the kind that sent shivers down my spine. It was far more dire than that. It gave me the impression that he truly recognized my presence. Not merely the impoverished tenant seated opposite him, but the entirety of the weary, tattered, and silently desperate individual I had been striving so diligently to hold together. I rose gradually, my hands trembling more than I wished they would. "I will inform you," I remarked. He gave a single nod, remaining silent, allowing me to have the final say unchallenged. Yet, as I made my way to the exit, I sensed his gaze trailing behind me, lingering at the threshold. For the first time, I found myself embracing the sensation rather than resenting it. I loathed the fact that I felt no loathing whatsoever. As I distanced myself from that conversation, I hoped to find a glimmer of clarity, a sense of relief in having stood firm, in resisting the subtle temptations woven into the dialogue, yet, understanding eluded me. What emerged instead was a burden in my chest that only intensified with each passing hour. The scene played on a loop in my mind, each word, each glance, each silence between us analyzed and scrutinized endlessly. The reality was that I had already stepped over a boundary the instant I allowed the notion to linger unchallenged. In the days that followed, I immersed myself in a myriad of distractions, seeking to lose myself in their embrace. I immersed myself in job applications as if it were my primary vocation, endlessly scrolling through listings that began to meld into one another, engaging in waitressing, reception duties, retail, or any endeavor that might grant me a brief respite. Yet, when the responses finally arrived, they were merely courteous refusals, cloaked in the sterile vernacular of corporate speak: "Positions filled, not quite the fit we seek at this moment. Wishing you the very best in your quest." Each rejection chipped away at my resolve just a bit more. With each passing day, the apartment seemed to shrink further. The walls appeared to draw nearer, weary of my restless pacing, weary of observing my futile spirals that led to no destination. The pile of unopened bills on the counter grew increasingly impossible to overlook. The crimson ink on the rent notice stared back at me from across the room, a silent accusation that demanded my attention. Yet, the silence from my boyfriend lingers on. There were no calls, no check-ins, not even a casual text to inquire about my well-being. In those initial days, I convinced myself that he was merely allowing me some distance, perhaps believing that I required time to sort through my thoughts independently. Yet, as the week wore on, the conviction began to wane. The distance that lay between us was not fleeting. It was inherent, an integral part of the design. An attribute, not a defect. I began to observe truths I had previously been reluctant to acknowledge. So frequently, our dialogues revolved around his existence, his profession, his burdens. How infrequently he inquired about my own. He brushed aside my concerns with swift platitudes, as though kindness were a commodity he dispensed sparingly, reserved solely for crises that aligned with his own comfort zone. It seems that financial troubles, it appears, were not deemed sufficient. As I lingered in that realization, my anger intensified, not directed at him. Or perhaps not solely at him. Yet, I reflect upon my own being, for clinging so fervently to the notion of who we were meant to become. Endlessly poised in anticipation, longing for him to bridge the distance between us. On the fourth night, as I sat cross-legged on the floor with a bowl of cereal that I lacked the appetite to finish, my phone suddenly illuminated the dim room, not from that source. It was not the message I had been feigning indifference towards, yet secretly yearned for. The message came from my landlord. "I trust this message finds you well. I'm simply reaching out to see how things are going." 7 straightforward words, nothing particularly dramatic. Nothing implied. Yet, they pried open a part of me that I had tightly sealed away, gripping it with both hands, the sheer grace of it. The mere gesture of someone inquiring about my well-being, devoid of any subsequent judgment or unsolicited advice. It stole the breath from my lungs. I hesitated to reply immediately. I gazed at the message for what felt like an eternity, poring over it repeatedly until the letters began to meld into one another. My fingers danced above the keyboard, hesitating as I crafted and discarded a myriad of responses. When I finally responded, it was devoid of any cleverness or defensiveness. Only the truth. I find myself in a less than favorable state. His response arrived with remarkable swiftness. Should you wish to converse, I am at your disposal. It lacked any hint of flirtation. Take your time. Merely an unbarred entrance. Anticipating, uncertainty lingered as I slipped on my shoes and reached for my jacket. I reassured myself that this was merely a moment to clear my thoughts. Shall we take a stroll? Nothing further yet. My feet seemed to possess a wisdom that my mind had yet to grasp. Without a moment's pause, I stepped into his office. The illumination lingered in the room. The gentle illumination cascading onto the pavement imbued the surroundings with a warmth that seemed almost unwarranted. I lingered outside far longer than necessary, my hands buried deep in my pockets, urging myself to pivot and return home. Yet my body remained anchored, unmoving in its position. Then, after a moment, as though he had felt my presence through the very walls, the door creaked open. He appeared unfazed by my presence. "Step inside," he murmured softly. I entered the room, my heartbeat echoing in my ears, a sound so pronounced I was certain he could perceive it. The air was tinged with the subtle aroma of coffee mingling with the scent of aged wood. The familiar melody drifted gently from the radio, weaving a tapestry of comfort in the air between us, a sensation I questioned whether I was worthy of experiencing. Remained on my feet, wary of the vulnerability that sitting might bring. I did not arrive with the intention of I began. Yet the words seemed too burdensome to complete. He gave a single nod. Gradually. I am aware. A fleeting moment, yet unmistakable, when our gazes intertwined and an unspoken connection surged between us. Acknowledgement. Comprehension, whatever it was, it constricted my throat with such intensity that swallowing became a near impossibility. I exhaled, unaware of the tension I had been carrying within me. I found myself confessing my weariness. "Then take a seat," he said, gesturing to the chair opposite him. I certainly did. Gradually, with great care. The simple act of sitting down seems to imbue everything with a deeper sense of reality. For a time, our words fell silent. The stillness that enveloped us held no discomfort. It felt more like an invitation. Room to exhale. I stand by my previous words. Eventually, he made his offer. "I won't impose any pressure on you, and no matter the outcome, the decision lies with you." I inclined my head, my gaze anchored to the ground. I found myself unable to meet his gaze, yet, in the stillness that ensued, I sensed the heaviness of his gaze upon me. Non-intrusive. Unassuming, simply present. In that fleeting instant, I became acutely aware of the time that had passed since someone had gazed at me in such a manner. A particular stillness exists that requires no spoken language. A silence that lingers between two individuals, where all unspoken words float in the atmosphere, waiting to be acknowledged. Anticipating. The silence enveloped the room as I sat opposite him, my fingers clutching the chair's edge as if it could anchor me to the ground. Reassured myself that my presence was solely for the purpose of conversation. For the simple reason that I longed for someone to listen to my voice. Truly listen to me, free from the burdens of expectation. Yet, that was not the complete truth. The instant I swung that door open, I knew I had crossed into uncharted territory. As I stepped into his office, a weight of unspoken thoughts lingered on my tongue. He observed me as one might gaze at a flickering flame, uncertain whether to extinguish it or let it burn on. Serene. Unwavering, conscious of the peril yet resolute in facing it head-on. I felt compelled to refuse him. I wished to express that I did not embody that type of woman, that I lacked the ability to accomplish the task we were both approaching with such caution. Yet the truth resonated too powerfully within me to dismiss. I found myself weary of the constant effort to maintain my composure, weary of the facade that equates strength with solitude. Weary of lingering in uncertainty, hoping someone would deem me worthy of their presence. As I finally lifted my gaze to connect with his, I remained unflinching, refrained from offering an apology. The silence became my voice. He stood, gliding with the familiar quiet confidence I had learned to appreciate in him, and traversed the small distance that separated us. His steps were unhurried, a deliberate pace that suggested no desire to bridge the gap. He halted as he approached, positioning himself just near enough for me to sense the warmth radiating from him, without the need for any physical contact. Yet, he lingered, perpetually in anticipation, granting me the freedom to decide. I did not express my agreement, I was not obliged to. I extended my hand, my fingertips grazing the texture of his sleeve, sensing the strength that lay beneath it. That subtle, intentional gesture shattered the final remnants of defiance within me. I rose to my feet. Unhurried. Exercise caution. My body acted before my mind had the chance to dissuade me. In that fleeting instant, a solitary heartbeat of doubt lingered, presenting me with the choice to retreat. Perhaps I could have convinced myself that this was merely a misguided notion, a product of my own desperation, yet, I refrained. Instead, I bridged the distance that separated us, leaning in closer, my lips meeting his in a soft embrace. It lacked softness, it was resolute. It was a hunger that only the depths of loneliness could evoke. His hands ascended, one placed softly at the small of my back, the other tenderly cradling the side of my face, anchoring me as though I were on the brink of collapse. Yet, I found myself not descending. I found myself in the midst of a choice. Opting for desire, for connection, for a transformation beyond the solitary woman who is just managing to keep it all intact. The kiss deepened, yet time seemed to stand still. No hurried scrabbling or seizing. Every movement was deliberate, slow and measured, as if he fully understood the peril before him and embraced the urgency of taking his time with the flames. As we finally said our goodbyes, there was no sense of shame lingering between us. It was not accompanied by regret. I kept my gaze fixed on him, I locked eyes with him, breathless, my heart racing so fiercely that I could sense it in my fingertips. His gaze delved into mine, lingering once more, perpetually in a state of anticipation. Yet, on this occasion, I found my voice. "I am uncertain of what this reveals about me," I murmured. His hand brushed against my chin, tenderly elevating my face to meet his gaze. "It defines your humanity. I ought to have wept. I ought to have experienced a sense of being shattered, tainted, or filled with shame. However, I chose not to. What washed over me was an unusual sense of solace in the act of being acknowledged. Truly observed." His gaze met mine, not with the judgment of a failure, nor the scrutiny of a problem to be fixed, but with the recognition of a woman possessing desires and aspirations that did not render her fragile. She was brought to life. As I departed from his office that evening, I chose not to run. I didn't slip away like a soul burdened by a truth too heavy to reveal. I strode forward, resolute, my chin lifted, the burden of my decision resting heavily yet assuredly upon my shoulders. Yet, as I crossed the threshold into my apartment, the silence enveloped me in an unfamiliar way. Somehow, it feels heavier. The space that once enveloped me in a tight embrace now seemed vast and desolate. I perched on the edge of my bed, my fingers gliding over my lips as if I could still sense the imprint of his kiss lingering there. I refrained from calling my boyfriend. At that moment, his voice was the last thing I wanted to hear. He didn't want the echo of his indifference to overshadow the memory of someone who had truly listened. The dawn arrived with an unsettling swiftness, the sunlight, seeping through the blinds, bore an unforgiving quality. I reclined, my gaze fixed upon the ceiling, the familiar ache in my chest now more pronounced. I was acutely aware that this was far from finished, not at this moment. For all my attempts to convince myself that a single kiss marked the conclusion, that it was merely a fleeting lapse, a mere accident, the reality ran far deeper than that. I yearn to experience it once more. The body retains the echoes of what the mind desperately seeks to conceal. It recalls the heat of hands in forbidden places, the gentle press of lips against skin that was never meant to be caressed. It recalls the heaviness of longing, the piercing lucidity of being craved, yet, despite the countless reassurances I offered myself that it was merely a mistake, a fleeting lapse, my body remained unconvinced. The subsequent days unfolded without the weight of any monumental choice. There was no abrupt change, no theatrical clash with my reflection in the glass, did not collapse in despair, weeping with remorse. In that moment, a profound silence enveloped the surroundings. Excessively silent. A monotonous drone lingered beneath the facade of each mundane task I undertook. I responded to calls, offered polite smiles to neighbors, and maintained the delicate facade of everyday life. Yet, my thoughts drifted away, and my mind kept returning to the warmth of that kiss, to the way he cradled my face with such tenderness, as if I were fragile and could break with the slightest pressure. That patience, that unwavering control, had nestled itself deep within me, and no pretense could shake it free. I chose not to share that with my boyfriend. The chasm that separated us had expanded to such an extent that it seemed like yet another fragment had vanished into the void where our conversations once thrived. Yet, he remained oblivious. Or if he did, it seemed he lacked the inclination to inquire. Our previous exchange had been as fleeting and impersonal as those that preceded it. I had casually noted that I was still in search of employment. His response had been the all too familiar, half-hearted assurance that something would eventually materialize. This is not a proposal for assistance. There wasn't even a single inquiry regarding my well-being, only those familiar, weary phrases, uttered as if he had practiced them countless times, stripped of any true significance. It ought not to have caught me off guard. And yet, it persisted. Amidst the swirling tempest of my anger and disappointment, a flicker of hope persisted within me, yearning for him to awaken, that he would notice me standing there, striving with all my might to maintain my composure, and understand just how near I was to shattering. Yet he chose not to. As the silence lingered between us, another voice within me began to resonate with increasing intensity, the one who persistently evoked the sensation of being desired. To be acknowledged. Countless times, I found myself contemplating a message to my landlord. My thumb lingered above his name on my phone countless nights, tracing the letters as if they contained the key to some elusive answer. Yet, I refrained from making contact. Initially, not at all. A serendipitous meeting shattered the impasse. As I trudged back from the grocery store, my arms laden with bags that felt almost too cumbersome to bear, I caught sight of him standing outside the building. He toiled on the front steps, mending a loose railing that had been swaying precariously for weeks. The sun sank gracefully, stretching elongated shadows over the pavement. For a fleeting moment, I found myself standing there, captivated by his presence. He lifted his gaze, locking onto mine just as I was about to avert my eyes. "Do you require assistance?" he inquired. I parted my lips to reject the offer, the automatic denial poised on the tip of my tongue. However, I chose not to utilize it. I simply nodded, and he moved closer, effortlessly relieving me of the bags, embodying the same tranquil grace that characterized all his actions. I ascended the stairs behind him, the burden of the groceries giving way to a far more oppressive weight in my chest. As I stepped into my apartment, I placed the keys on the counter and turned to express my gratitude, yet the words caught in my throat, a jumble of unspoken feelings. "Are you managing all right?" he inquired gently. It was merely a straightforward inquiry. A matter that ought to have been inconsequential, yet, no one else had inquired. That's not the way. Not with eyes that truly sought the truth. The sharp ache behind my eyes surged forth before I had a chance to halt it. "I am well." I was not truthful. My voice is too fragile to be taken seriously. He chose not to confront me about it. Did not exert pressure. He offered a single nod, his eyes unwavering as they locked onto mine. A lengthy silence enveloped the room. A moment when the silence speaks volumes, far beyond what words ever could. Uncertainty lingered in my mind, questioning whether it was the ache of solitude that drew me nearer or if my pride was finally yielding to the heavy burden of it all. Yet, as I moved closer to him, I found myself unable to halt my advance. And in his stillness, I realized he was here to stay. The kiss this time was measured, deliberate. It showed no signs of hunger. The pace was languid, intentional. A kiss that poses a question, lingering in the air, patiently awaiting the response to unfold. His hands moved with precision, following the contour of my jaw, the arch of my waist, as though he sought to imprint my form in his memory. I allowed myself to surrender to it. I allowed myself to experience how his touch eased the pain in my chest, even as it intensified the guilt coiled tightly within my stomach. As I withdrew, gasping for air, my gaze remained steadfast. I shouldn't be here, I murmured, yet we both understood the truth behind the facade. I found myself precisely in the place I had longed to be. He remained silent. He made no effort to sway my opinion. He observed me in silence, with a calm patience, just as he always had. I understand, he replied, and in some inexplicable way that only deepened the turmoil, for the reality was, he was not the one pursuing this. I was there. From the very beginning, the decision rested in my hands. There exists a perilous allure in the sensation of being desired, especially after enduring an extended period of obscurity. It seeps into your very being, occupying the empty spaces you've grown accustomed to overlooking, and establishes its residence within. I repeatedly reassured myself that I remained in command, that the situation was not as it appeared, yet, control possesses a peculiar nature. You believe you're in control, yet by the moment you grasp that the reins have eluded your grasp, the harm has already been inflicted. Following that evening, he vanished from my life. Silence reigns, no calls, no texts, no enigmatic messages lingering on my phone. He failed to appear at my doorstep. There was no necessity for him to do so. The stillness transformed into an irresistible lure, drawing me nearer with each passing day. The more he lingered in silence, the more the yearning within me intensified. I found it quite astonishing how deeply I longed for him to reach out, to pursue me, to bridge the gap between us. Yet he chose not to. The lack of pressure only exacerbated the situation. Was acutely aware of his intentions. It took only 3 days for me to shatter the stillness I had embraced. The note I dispatched to him was succinct, uncomplicated. Only a single line, yet it bore a weight far greater than one might expect. Are you back at your place? The response was not immediate. It arrived hours later, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in gentle hues of purple and blue. His response lingered softly, mirroring the subtlety of the inquiry. Indeed.no promises were made. There are no invitations. Only the term, abandoned in that moment. Challenging me to determine my next course of action. Another hour passed in stillness before I finally allowed myself to stir, repeated to myself, time and again, that I would not go. I was meant for something greater than this. More resilient than this, yet the deception grew fragile in my grasp, and before long, it shattered completely. I stepped out of my apartment, my mind wandering, hardly pausing to consider the attire I had chosen. Casual denim paired with a sleek black top that embraced my form just a touch more than intended, sleeves rolled up to reveal my forearms. I reassured myself that it was of no consequence. I wasn't dressing for his gaze, I dressed solely for myself. Yet, as I strolled past, my gaze fell upon my own reflection in the window. Even I found it hard to accept the deception. The journey to his abode seemed to stretch on, far exceeding its rightful length. Every step was measured and deliberate, as if the weight of my choice bore down on my shoulders, causing me to move more slowly. Yet I pressed on. As I approached the door, I found myself pausing, my fist hovering mid-air, caught in a moment of stillness, unable to move forward. The apartment complex exuded a serene stillness, with the gentle hum of the city fading into the background, creating an atmosphere that felt almost timeless. I found myself on the brink of retreat, nearly there. Yet, the door swung open before I could seize the moment. He lingered in that moment, casually propped against the frame, his arms draped effortlessly across his chest. There was no smile. There was no hint of a smirk. Those unwavering eyes fixated on me, poised in anticipation for my initial gesture. "I wasn't certain you would arrive," he remarked. I hesitated before responding. I found it hard to believe that my voice truly belonged to me. After a moment of contemplation, I finally responded, "I wasn't sure either." The distance that separated us was paradoxical, simultaneously constricting and expansive. He took a step back, widening the door's embrace, and I ventured across the threshold before doubt could seize my resolve. The apartment was shrouded in a gentle twilight, the delicate illumination of a solitary lamp in the corner casting a warm, golden hue across the space. The air was tinged with a subtle hint of cedar, underpinned by a deeper, more opulent aroma. A fragrance that eluded my vocabulary yet resonated with familiarity, unmistakably his. Found myself in a moment of uncertainty, my hands fidgeting as I grappled with the decision of whether to take a seat or remain on my feet. Yet, he did not hurry me. He never did. He strolled by me, making his way into the kitchen, his pace leisurely and unhurried. "Would you care for some coffee?" he inquired, as though this were the most commonplace exchange imaginable. I found myself shaking my head, only to pause and acknowledge the absurdity of the moment. And oh, I insisted, the word catching in my throat. He filled a cup for himself regardless, resting against the counter, savoring each sip, his gaze fixed intently on mine. The silence that enveloped us lingered, a palpable weight that settled deep within my very being. "Shouldn't be here," I murmured, my voice dropping to a whisper. His response exuded an unwavering calmness. "I am aware," the words struck with a force I hadn't anticipated. Within them lay no allure, no entreaty, merely the stark truth. And that was the moment my knees buckled beneath me. Since he had not sought this out, he was not exerting any pressure. He was merely allowing me the room to desire it sufficiently to step over the threshold on my own. I settled onto the edge of his couch, my hands gripping my lap with such intensity that my knuckles throbbed. I gazed at them, my heart pounding, every fiber of my being urging me to either flee or bridge the distance that lay between us. Yet, neither of us took the first step. I was the one. It is perpetually I. I rose, gradually, my legs burdened with an unfamiliar weight, and made my way across the room to him. He stood his ground, did not lean in. Simply bided my time. I extended my hand, letting it graze softly against his chest, sensing the calm, measured cadence of his breath beneath my touch. As I gazed up at him, I found his eyes unchanged, mirroring the familiar depths they had revealed on countless occasions prior. Enduring. Observing, allowing the space to remain open for my decision. All questions had been resolved between us. The kiss I shared with him carried no sense of urgency. It lacked any sense of urgency. It was intentional. A decision awaits, the decision is mine. And this time, as his hands settled on my waist, drawing me nearer, I remained unflinching. I surrendered to the warmth of his presence, allowing the gentle caress of his lips to dissolve the remnants of my self-control. My fingers wove into the fabric of his shirt, gripping firmly, anchoring myself against the gravity of the choice I was about to make. Silence enveloped us in the wake of that moment. No provisions were necessary. As I finally drew back, gasping for air, my lips tender and swollen from the fervent kiss, I locked my gaze with his, holding it steady. I chose not to offer an apology. The reality was, I held no regrets about it, not in the slightest. I vowed to maintain my distance after that night. That I would discover the resolve to establish the boundary once more. To serve as a reminder of who I was never meant to become. Yet, the body possesses a memory of its own. A language unto itself. Despite the countless times I rehearsed my guilt, and the myriad ways I attempted to frame it as wrong in my mind, my body remained unyielding, forever etched with the memory of that touch. To be desired unconditionally. Unconditionally, unapologetically. The following morning, I found myself not in his apartment. I chose not to remain. I departed before the dawn's first rays kissed the windows. The serene hush of the dawn enveloped me, a gentle weight at my back as I shut the door softly, sealing away the world within. The journey home unfolded at a leisurely pace. My mind whirls in that peculiar, hazy mist where shame and satisfaction intertwine seamlessly. Every individual contending for their own territory. I held back my tears, I considered the possibility. Yet, the tears remained elusive. Instead, there lingered only that hollow ache beneath my ribs, the space where dignity was meant to reside. I lingered in anticipation, expecting the weight of regret to descend upon me. To submerge me beneath its heavy burden, yet it did not. The regret lingered at a distance. Summary. A sentiment I convinced myself I ought to experience, yet found absent within me. Upon arriving home, I immediately stepped into the shower. I lingered beneath the torrent, my skin becoming tender and raw from the relentless heat, scrubbing at my skin, as though the act could somehow wipe away the lingering memory of his touch. His lips. The sound of my breath halting in my throat, yet, nothing could cleanse it from existence. It existed in that very moment. Deep within me, woven into the very essence of my being now. As my phone vibrated later that morning, a surge of anticipation coursed through me before my eyes even landed on the screen. I anticipated it would be him, even though uncertainty lingered in my mind about what his words might reveal. Yet, it was not. It was my partner, a relaxed message. Bright and effortless. As though all that existed between us remained unbroken. Greetings. How is your search for employment progressing? Have you found any success yet? There was no acknowledgement of my silence. There was no inquiry into my true state of being. A courteous follow-up, as always, removed and aloof. As if I were a fellow professional he hadn't encountered in some time. She was not the woman destined to capture his heart. I gazed at the message, my thumb poised above the reply button. Countless thoughts danced on the tip of my tongue, yearning for expression. To let out as CRY.TO cast at him as if they were stones. In what distant place did you find yourself when I sought your presence? Did you truly see how near I was to unraveling? Do you even notice that I've been sinking right before your eyes? Yet, I crafted the same falsehood I had been weaving for weeks. Continuing the search, I am well. And when he responded with, "You'll get there. Your potential is undeniable," a subtle yet profound shift occurred within me, so hushed that I nearly overlooked its presence. Faith comes effortlessly when there is no price to pay. The days ahead stretch out languidly, the hours unfurling, extending beyond their rightful span. Each task weighs more heavily upon me. Each inhalation pierces the emptiness dwelling within me. I have not contacted my landlord. He failed to make contact with me. Yet, the silence that enveloped us was far from void. It hummed beneath my skin like an electric current. He occupied my thoughts more frequently than I cared to admit. Contemplating his actions, curious if he had me on his mind. With each thought, guilt surged in my throat, thick and bitter, only to recede once more as I recalled that my boyfriend had ceased to see me long before I allowed anyone else to gaze upon me. As the clock inched toward the late hours of Wednesday evening, an unexpected sound shattered the stillness that had enveloped the night. Throughout the day, I wandered the city without a particular destination in mind. Completing additional applications. Responding to automated emails, engaging in the rituals of hope, yet lacking genuine belief. Upon my arrival home, a profound ache settled into my feet. A dull ache pulsed through my head, and my resolve had been frayed to a whisper. A knock echoed through the stillness, reverberating against the door. Quiet, there is no immediate need for action. A gentle, unwavering cadence that caused my heart to skip a beat. I stood still, caught in a moment of disbelief, gazing intently at the door. My breath is shallow. I was certain it was him prior to my relocation. Prior to my examination. I was aware. As I swung the door open, he was there, poised just as he always was. Serene. Gathered, enduring, he refrained from crossing the threshold. Did not lean in, merely remained in place. With his hands tucked away in his pockets. Gaze locked with mine. "I wanted to check in and see how you are doing," he uttered. His voice was a whisper, barely rising above the silence. The way those words unraveled me was something I despised. How effortlessly they breached the fragile defenses I had labored to maintain over the past few days. It was merely a trivial detail, inquiring about my well-being. And yet, it seemed to be the first genuine act of kindness I had experienced in weeks. I chose not to extend an invitation to him, I chose to step outside instead. As I closed the door softly behind me, I couldn't help but hope that this small gesture would preserve the fragile boundary that lay between us. We lingered in the stillness of the hallway, the atmosphere hung heavy around us. The confines were inadequate for the burden of our unspoken words. I folded my arms across my chest. It serves a purpose beyond mere warmth, it is a means to keep myself intact. I am well. I declared the deception, fragile and fraying at the seams. His gaze remained steadfast. He refrained from calling me out, allow the words to linger in the space that separates us. Burdened by the unspoken reality they concealed. I ought to have turned and left, I ought to have expressed my gratitude to him. I turned around and made my way back into my apartment. However, I chose not to. I found myself standing there, paralyzed by the weight of his existence. Through the gentle warmth of his eyes, why the pain that had been accumulating within me for an eternity. As he approached, there was nothing hostile in his demeanor. It lacked any semblance of assertiveness, the pace was languid. Intentional. Allowing space for me to retreat if I so desired, yet, I remained still. As his hand extended forth, fingers gliding softly along the contour of my jaw, I surrendered to the caress, an instinctive response I hadn't intended. It was a decision I made. Once more, this time, the kiss was gentle. There is no hunger. There is no sense of urgency, only warmth and a silent comprehension. A soft meeting of lips, imbued with the essence of inquiry rather than declaration. I returned the kiss regardless. As I finally drew back. Eyes remained shut. Inhale lightly, all that occupied my mind was the unsettling ease with which it had unfolded once more. More straightforward than it ever ought to have been. How I longed to say that was the final moment. The kiss we exchanged in the shadowy corridor of my building marked the last misstep. It was the instant I regained my awareness and drew myself away from the precipice. Yet, that would be a falsehood, the reality was considerably less theatrical and significantly more difficult to accept. Ceasing was not my desire. Not quite, not in the manner that held significance. I continually reassured myself that I remained in command. Each step I took toward him was a deliberate decision, one I could just as easily retract, yet, decisions of this nature possess an uncanny ability to intertwine, binding themselves inextricably. Each one rendering the subsequent more difficult to deny. And when you finally come to understand the distance you've traveled, the road you once traveled has faded into the distance, leaving only echoes of its presence. In the days that ensued, my mind transformed into an unending battlefield, each silent pause transformed into a trial, where I stood as both the defendant and the judge, perpetually traversing the labyrinth of rationalizations and self-reproach. Yet, despite all my inner debates, for all the guilt I have meticulously rehearsed, the undeniable force lingered just beneath the surface. The fragment of my being that had longed for an experience that would ignite such vitality, the most challenging truth to confront wasn't the act of betrayal itself. It was not merely the act of betrayal. The most challenging aspect was grasping the reason behind its surprising simplicity, and moved through the day with my boyfriend as if everything remained the same. Though all had transpired. Our dialogues lingered in the shallows, untouched by depth. Check-ins that resembled mere calendar reminders rather than expressions of true concern. When he inquired about my well-being, I responded in the familiar manner that has become my signature, why deceptions flow effortlessly, honed to perfection. He never pushed. I had never taken the time to examine the details, to see the fractures beneath the surface, yet, my body turned against me. Every time he extended his hand towards me. Every time his hand grazed my skin, the warmth that ought to have existed in that moment was conspicuously missing, leaving a void where connection should have thrived. I sensed the extent to which I had already slipped beyond his grasp. How much of myself he had allowed to fade long before anyone else had laid a hand on me. The most peculiar aspect was his apparent lack of awareness. I found myself seeking opportunities to encounter my landlord. Winding my way around the building, lingering at the mailbox, time seems to stretch just a bit too far. Attuned to the gentle whisper of his door as it opens in the distance. It was a source of disappointment for me, yet desire does not seek the validation of pride. It moves forward without seeking approval. On a Thursday evening, the world seemed to pause. It was one of those languid, oppressive afternoons when the sky loomed heavy above, and the air felt suffocatingly thick. That I encountered him once more. I found myself returning from yet another unsuccessful attempt at securing employment. My feet ache from traversing too far in shoes ill-suited for any genuine endeavor. The familiar ache of disappointment throbbed within my head, a relentless reminder of unfulfilled hopes. The burdens of the day bore down heavily upon me, drawing my form inward, rendering me diminutive. He toiled in the garden, tending to the verdant patch that graced the front of the building. Effortless upkeep. All is as expected, yet, the vision of him standing there. Unwavering. Concentrated, subtly proficient. It resonated profoundly within me. I ought to have continued my stride, ought to have offered a courteous nod. I maintained my distance. We feigned a relationship that was merely that of landlord and tenant, yet, I refrained. I lingered at the gate, my fingers gripping the strap of my bag, observing him for a heartbeat longer than necessary. He lifted his gaze, our eyes locking, as if he could decipher my thoughts with unsettling ease. "Your weariness is evident," he uttered. I presented a feeble smile, one that scarcely touched my lips. "It has been a long day," I responded. His words held no invitation. No suggestion, yet the distance that separated us was imbued with a familiar, electric stillness I had learned to identify. The sort that lingers patiently. The type that gives freely, without the need for a request. Following him inside was never part of my intentions. I never convinced myself that it would occur once more. Yet, as he rose, cleaning his hands with a rag and motioning toward the door, my feet acted before my thoughts could catch up. The apartment exuded a cool, dim ambience. The lights dimmed. A delicate whisper of cedar and coffee lingers in the atmosphere. I lingered at the threshold, caught in a moment of indecision, contemplating whether to forge ahead or retreat into the familiar. "If you desire, I can prepare a cup of tea for you." He extended his offer, his voice gentle and soothing. I nodded, fully aware that what I truly required was not tea. He navigated the kitchen with a steady, deliberate grace. An unbearable quality lingered in the air, a disquieting sense of normalcy that enveloped everything, the gentle cadence of simple home rituals. There was a gentle attentiveness in the manner he filled the kettle. He stood there, patiently observing as the water began to bubble and rise. As he passed me the cup, our fingers grazed against each other, and that fleeting touch ignited a warmth deep within me. My breath hitched, and my heart pounded audibly in the stillness. For a time, our words fell silent. The silence lingered, dense and palpable, enveloping us in its heavy embrace, and I sensed its suffocating pressure against my heart. "I ought to leave," I murmured, though my tone betrayed my uncertainty. He nodded with deliberation, placing his cup down gently, inching closer yet allowing me the freedom to retreat if I so chose. His gaze lingered on mine, unwavering and resolute. "I know," he said, his tone unadorned. Yet, I remained still. Instead, I bridged the gap on my own. Once more. My hand extended toward his, my body surrendering to the irresistible pull that had drawn me to him from the very beginning. The kiss arrived with a gentler touch this time, yet it held the same unwavering conviction. My lips sought his as if they were already familiar with the path. His hands lifted, one gently caressing my cheek, while the other found its place at the small of my back, anchoring me in the very moment I had fought so fiercely to evade, surrendered to the caress. Into the fervor of him, in the realm where guilt and desire intertwined with such intensity that the distinction between them faded into obscurity. As we finally said our goodbyes, an unsettling silence enveloped the room. Excessively motionless. "I can't keep doing this," I whispered, yet, as the words slipped from my lips, a profound emptiness echoed within me. For the reality was, I had no desire to cease. Not at this moment.